Alright, so here's the ceiling fan in action, and we're going to show here how to install it. Okay, so first things first, we will unpack the ceiling fan. This is the 60-inch Carrington fan. Notice that the fan blades are fairly wide, but it's 60 inches across. It doesn't mean the fan blades are really huge, it just means they're going to be spread out on a dome on a center. And remember what we talked about earlier and showed. This has to do with a fan which needs to be mounted very close to the ceiling because it's a relatively low ceiling. So everything kind of gets packed up close to that. So we unpack all the pieces, we try to set them out carefully, spread them out if you get a chance, and separate the packaging from the parts, and double check everything as you separate the packaging from the parts. You have to unpack the entire thing before you're putting anything together. Alright, so with all the parts laid out, we're going with what I call the short installation, or basically the low ceiling clearance installation. And that means we're not going to use some of the parts here. This little extender piece not going to be used. We have this little trim ring and bezel type assembly. Actually has to be taken apart for the next couple stages of installation. So I'll take that apart, we'll show you what else is going on. Okay, so according to the instructions, we're going to take this little assembly apart. We end up with this piece that's going to go on the light fixture that's on the building. We end up with this piece, a trim ring. This piece you're going to end up throwing away, just pops out of the trim ring. That would be used if we were using the little extenders. So we end up with this, and you'll see that there's several holes and slots in that, but we're only going to use 3 of them. The rest are just clearance slots. What we're going to do is we look at our fan motor housing, and we're going to put that on there so that we clear everything on 3 of those screws. So we're going to take 3 of these screws off. We're going to mount them to this, and that eliminates a lot of the space on the way this goes together. So in reassembling this, we feed the wire through. The wire can be cut short, and which I'm going to be doing at one point. Basically, the black wire is most likely going to be for the light, the blue wire for the fan, the white wire is the ground. What we're going to be doing on this is we've got to tie these 2 together because there's only one power source going to that outlet. Pull those 3 screws out, and then of course this gets set. So the 3 really are just a spacer. The other 3 will get put back in there. This trim ring just leaves dangling for now with the notches facing up, the curved part kind of facing down. Okay, so with the base piece in place, we've got our ground hooked up. It's going through the base of our mounting point here. It's larger than it looks. It's just because my hand is closer to the camera than this thing. But basically you've got to tighten it up against the ceiling here on those 2 screws, and this thing has to be able to handle all the weight. So if we grab onto this, and again I gotta kind of get on something here, but we want, if you can physically pull that down without putting a hell of a lot of weight on that, you're wrong. This thing needs to be able to hold a fair amount of weight. So we've got that piece up. We're going to be putting the fan motor up. Next stage, I can't hold one camera with this. We're going to be putting the wires in. Now, because of the way this house is wired, this was previously a light. Now it's going to become a light and fan. So I've only got one hot wire coming into this setup, and both hot wires from the fan are going to be hooked up to the black. There's only one negative ground there, and that's going to go on the white. So what's going to happen here, I'll show you here. So both of these, one of these is for the fan, one is for the light. They're both going to hook to the black that's coming out of the house wiring. This is going to hook to the white. The ground was just going to the housing. So we're going to climb up there, get that hooked up, and then there's 2 screws sticking out. They're going to lock into these keyways. And then as soon as I get those locked into the keyways, I'm going to put regular screws into these 2, and then I'll tighten everything down. Okay, with this up on the ceiling, there's a couple of things to be aware of. One, it's a bear to handle because it's heavy. You got to hold it. Either have a second person to hold it while you attach the wires, or there's a way to kind of put it on a shoulder. It's really awkward. I didn't want to show that in a video. The trim piece on this particular installation isn't held on very well. So once I get all these in and I push that up in place, it doesn't really want to stay. I'm gonna do something a little improvised to make that stay. And it's not the end of the world if you just eliminate that piece. Okay, it's not the end of the world to just eliminate that piece. If it really is a problem, just eliminate it. Break it off, throw it away. If you run into an issue with your electrical wiring, you'll want to sort that out sooner than later before the thing's fully installed. So I'm going to do kind of a partial. I'm going to check it. I'm going to throw the switch, make sure that we're okay, that no sparks are flying before I go much further. The next stage after this is to remove these packing buffers for the fan motor. They just all get unscrewed. We leave those in until this is in place, because if it gets dropped or jostled or something like that, they kind of save the motor from bashing around in the housing. So on to the next stage. Oh, another thing is that the mounting hardware for the center post, that's still attached to the top of the fan when you get that. They say you don't have to remove it. I found that the installation went a lot faster when I just kind of took out everything that's not being used in the upper housing when we do the against the ceiling installation like you see here. Okay, so putting the fan blade bases on, we put these on, but you'll see when you get these, the screws are already kind of run in. You got to back those out. You don't have to take them all the way off, but you got to back them out before getting them on these, and then as you screw it in, it'll suck back up into it. But what I found is trying to twist them on when it's like this isn't going to happen. You got to back them up, contact the plate, twist it back in. Okay, so putting the fan blade bases on, we put these on, but you'll see when you get these, the screws are already kind of run in. You got to back those out. You don't have to take them all the way off, but you got to back them out before getting them on these, and then as you screw it in, it'll suck back up into it. But what I found is trying to twist them on when it's like this isn't going to happen. You got to back them up, contact the plate, twist it back in. So what you got is some screws that look like this, and you got the screw, you got this nut. The nut contacts on square holes on the fan blades and goes from the bottom. The screw goes from the top, and when you tighten it down, you're not trying to crank it super tight. We'll show how that looks. So the fan blades have a smooth side and a slightly ridged side. Smooth side's down, they're both the same color. These are basically the nut that goes on the inside, interferes with square holes on there. The screw side passes down from the top. I suggest putting the center one in first and then wrestling with the others. This is also a good time to be standing on a ladder or chair or some kind of a stool so that you can reach these things from the top. If you're using a power tool like an impact driver, don't crank that stuff down real hard. It just go until it's tight, and then you're there. Okay, so with the center one just finger tight, you can rotate this and get the others to line up. And then when you line them all up, get them all finger tight, then you hit it with a power tool. Don't crank one down with a power tool, then try to get the others in. Just get a finger tight, line up the others, and then you crank them all down once they're all in there. Okay, so with everything on and tightened up, we've got an electrical connection here, and we've got some screws which are going to come into play when we put the next stage together. But the thing right now is we've got to get this rubber band off, because this is going to go through the center of a hole in the next part. But you'll also notice that not all these wires are the same length, so it's going to be a little goofy, but we don't need a lot of length out of that either. It is also time to remove these 3 screws, because we're going to be using them on something else here in a minute. Okay, so our electrical connectors, this gets cut apart. These are going to go in the next layer down, which is the light. this plug gets connected. This is from up above, and then the other part's on this level of the housing. There's basically 4 levels here. The heaviest one being the 2nd level. This one's a 3rd. The bottom one's going to be the 4th, I guess. We also have to remove these 3 screws for putting the light housing on. These 2 have to be sticking down when the light goes on because they're going to be hooked up to connectors that are in the light housing itself. So I'm going to pop these screws out. We'll go on to the next stage. Alright, with things at this stage, we're afforded the opportunity to do some basic testing on this, switch testing and wiring testing, before getting it all together. That's just to make sure that both circuits are working before I close up the electrical wiring. The inner light housing on, these things tighten down. What I found was the 2 light things are kind of bumping into each other. We don't really want them touching, so you can just grab that and kind of twist it a little bit, get them spread out. That way, if there's any heat buildup, it doesn't go right up against something. Next, we're just going to put our glass globe on, kind of a pop-on sort of an arrangement, and we'll be pretty close to done. Alright, so with everything in place, we've got our fan controls. This one's going to be the fan speed and on and off. This is our light control. Over here, if you can see that, is our fan direction. Now I kind of prefer to have it pushing air down. Some people prefer it with a thing pulling up in order to have less wind in the room. Either way it goes, it's going to circulate your air and even out the temperature in a room and give you some air circulation. It's a 60-inch thing tip to tip, but it's not major air movement in my opinion because it's only a 3-bladed fan. But what